warm welcome Peter Pinter, the CEO of NeuroInsight. Pete's actually going to show us today how to put neuroscience to work for your brand. Neuro techniques are being widely used to optimize, creative, leverage media context, and more deeply understand ad impact. Pete's got a presentation here packed with real case studies, and I'm really looking forward to it. Welcome to the stage, Peter.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Just confirming, thank you for that lovely introduction. Confirming you can see my screen, and that's all a good thing.
Go.
All right. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed that technology works for us from here on in. And thank you to Fiona as well for the setup.
Try and get it back. Thank you.
Yeah, terrific. Hey, look, again, thank you, Nat, the IAB, and everyone who's joined us this morning. Real thrilled to be talking about media, creativity, and how we find the upside. And yes, a big thank you to Fiona, because here's my iceberg for today. A slightly different meaning, a slightly different context, but here we go. The iceberg I want to talk about is really, this huge area of our system one processing, as they call it, that is subconscious, that is beyond our conscious access and reach, and it's below the waterline. And that's just so important when it comes to our response to media content and, of course, creative content, which is what we're talking about today. So if you're using I guess traditional techniques and comparing that to what we're talking about with neuro on the right-hand side, of course, measures all brain activity, whether it's conscious or subconscious, as opposed to like a traditional technique, but like a survey or a focus group, which may only tap, part of the tip of the iceberg, which is that conscious and that sort of rational part of our response. So in summary, we would say neuroscience captures the subconscious very importantly. Content is always in context. It's in the moment, and it's reported on a second-by-second basis, so very, very granular. So yes, we are always asked, and probably more so these days, where does this buzz about attention come into the discussion? Well, I guess the first thing we would say is that, look, anything that evolves our understanding of impact, of media and environment and message is a good thing. So bring it on, we say, because the evolution beyond standard media metrics is just so overdue. I think we would all agree, beyond those sort of tonnage metrics of sort of reach, frequency and viewability. So I think you'll find that we're all aligned on that one. We've strove to basically measure long-term memory. And I guess the answer comes in what your particular metric tends to explain. What does it correlate with? And so we've strove to link our metrics to real-world sales data, real-world behavior. And that's just such an important thing in terms of what you should be asking yourself when it comes to attention, if you like. We also measure other layers of attention, like visual attention, general attention, from a neuro brain point of view. And we find that visual attention itself explains or correlates to about 15% of what long-term memory encoding does, and that link to real-world behavior. If we were to frame that in a slightly different way, here's what we would say is our mental communications spectrum. If the goal on the far top right is to get into the mind of the consumer, strengthen that mental availability and reinforce it, the other correlates which we find playing a huge effect are the subconscious, low attention processing, creative, context, emotion, many, many variables, audio, sound, frequency effects, and really interesting priming effects, storytelling, moments and glances can all tend to explain why memory encoding or why an ad walks through the doorway to memory. That can all be filtered down to one metric, which is called the neuro impact factor. And again, that one metric is being embraced by the industry more and more, as we find with the OMA in their currency. Sight, sound, context, emotion, storytelling, and even previous consumer experience with your brand has a role to play in that correlation. So that's what we find in terms of a very, very strong correlation. In this case, 86% between the neuro impact factor, our one metric, and our clients' advertising sales effectiveness in market through econometric modeling there. So very important. On to our very favorite topic, which is context. Now, media context plays a huge role in shaping and influencing the way your ad and your creative gets processed and gets stored into long-term memory. We've done some really interesting work with IAS just recently out in New York, and I'm sure you'll be hearing about it in this market too, where they've found that if the creative matches the environment with which it's in, you can get an additional 25 to 40% of long-term memory encoding. But here's the point. When an ad walks through the doorway to memory, it's joined by a range of other contextual ingredients at the moment of exposure. And that's the brain's way of storing that information in the most relevant way. And this is where context is so vitally important, because context shares its equity with an ad as it's stored in long-term memory. And here's a great example of how exactly that's done. So there's a way to actually define this and understand and put a label on this contextual fabric. What you're looking at here is realestate.com.au, and the average is 120. Strong is that outer dotted line of 140. And if we go in a clockwise direction, Australian, opportunity, informative, premium, trust, all very strong attributes of the contextual fabric of realestate.com.au. And if we look at an advertiser, for example, a typical advertiser like NAB, that's a good example of what they might look like in that environment. Our lowest rates ever, 2-year fixed rates in realestate.com. We've all seen it. What we can do is measure that creative on the same basis. And you can see that the creative intrinsically is that yellow line there. It matches the environment on trust and Australian in terms of strength, but before it's exposed in context, it's weaker on opportunity, information, and premium. However, if we look at the green line, the measure of that creative after it's been in context, you can see how it takes on the complexion of the surrounding media environment, and it actually grows where it was weaker than the environment pre. It actually takes on the composure and the complexion of that environment post. Here's a great way to look at it. Yellow data pre, green data post, and it grows on opportunity, informative, and premium to reflect that of the environment. What it does also do is it maintains its strength on Australian and trust. Again, it matches the environment. So you've seen two really powerful strategic forces in how context influences stories and creative growth, as you've seen, or maintenance. But there's one other invisible, really interesting thing that goes on at the same time. As attributes are grown as a function of context, they can simultaneously compress the competition, and they can suppress the competition's ownership of the same attributes. Here we can see opportunity, Australian, and to a small degree premium, shrinking or weakening with the CommBank at the same time as they grow in the context. So context is a hugely powerful force, and one that shapes the meaning of creativity in every single exposure that we see. Again, like Fiona was saying, we all violently agree that creativity is a very, very powerful force these days. And here's one way that we'd like to, I guess, share what we've seen being used really successfully. Power moments that we call iconic triggers in long form video content mainly can be used and repurposed to glue your campaign together. It's called multi-screen ready, and it's where you take one scene, which is the power moment that's already gone into memory, to strongly prime other mediums. And it's a great way to use and repurpose shorter form content. And when you use the right scene, the iconic trigger, it can prime other parts of your media mix by about 15%. So here again, we're finding that 15% stronger walking through the doorway to memory. So cross-media priming is a very, very powerful effector too. So perhaps think about how you can use the strongest, most influential moment in your ad to prime others. And we call it the neuro-iconic trigger. Okay, Nat, I think that's me and my 10 minutes. I've tried to be as strict as possible on that one.